Being alone, it's up there for one of the most condemning emotions a human can feel. No one wants to be alone. When you play games, you want your friends to be there. When we go out, we want company. It's almost like we're too afraid to be left with our own thoughts, always needing background noise like a podcast or music to fill the empty air. And this has slipped into games too, with developers so scared of invoking contemplation, they create infinitely long checklists and map markers, and people calling for your help around every corner, vying for your attention, not letting you even have the time to reflect like, am I enjoying this right now? Do I even want to do this anymore? And this makes way for a new kind of experience from a game, the complete opposite, where slower pacing and lack of distractions add rather than take away from an experience. I'm going to use mostly Red Dead Redemption 2 and Death Stranding to illustrate my point. Firstly, open world games are built upon a rule that guides the amount of time before something of interest appears, and it's normally between 30 to 50 seconds. Too little time and the world is oversaturated to the extent you can feel it's a game, like it's advertising how interesting it is. Yet if you let the gap be too big, the world will feel empty and underfilled. But this can be utilised. Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, has a much bigger gap than 40 seconds, and yet it has one of the most acclaimed worlds ever made, celebrated for how full and interesting it is, even though there are sizable stretches of map left mostly empty of anything but animals, much less interactions and objectively less to do. But that's the point. It's not underfilled, it's realistically filled. Every mountain, field and road shouldn't have something to occupy you, and with less things to randomly do, you spend more time enjoying the travel. Beautiful world has time to breathe, take center stage. Beautiful things don't have to ask for attention, and it's one of the only games where I will drop my horse to a slow trot, just because I want to. It gives you time to think, not just about the game, but about anything. Completely absorbed in what you're doing. True immersion. And if you do find a random event, it will feel all the more important and visceral for it. The empty space gives credibility to the field. The rule can change the feel of scale immensely, with Red Dead's world feeling almost elusively big. The offset of the 40-second rule, which if you play open world games you might even subconsciously clock, and then events happening on delay to your expectation, makes not just the actual event or interaction feel further apart, but everything. Everything now feels shifted. The whole map feels bigger. Having an interaction in real life every 80 seconds is super unrealistic, but for a game it feels pretty extensive. It gives you the perspective that if the time gap between each interaction is this long, then the entire world will fit to scale. And it is an objectively big map, but not half what you would think, and this is not a criticism, I think it's very well done. Whole atmospheres can completely shift area to area just simply based on the time intervals between each interesting event. When up in the mountains there is almost no content to interact with, apart from a handful of side quests, the area feels desolate and wild, like you are the only person up there. In contrast to Saint Denis or Valentine, people are calling for your help all the time, someone is in trouble or a fight is brewing. It's busy in all senses. There is a lot of noise and a lot of content for you to find. The density of content is essential to making the world feel more alive. Red Dead even makes another bigger example of this when New Austin is unlocked in the epilogue. Per its size, it probably has the least to actually do across the whole game, but not once does it feel empty or unfinished, just deliberately quieter to reflect the landscape. New Austin has a lot less random encounters for its size in the main game, and I don't think it's because of time stress or less effort. I think it's meant to be like this. New Austin is completely devastated by a plague, the streets of Armadillo are empty and most of the population is dead, and the world reflects that with a temper of the area as you ride through it. Another game which leans on its atmosphere and world heavily is Death Stranding, where the experience is built upon the lack of distractions, a juxtaposition of most games entirely. You can play for hours without coming across a deliberately placed hurdle. You stumble through a world that isn't familiar anymore. You make your own way from point A to point B, and the developer lets the journey be the key focus. The world is beautifully silent, and when you do come across a BT, the contrast of going from being alone to being chased in a few seconds really does feel intense. A flash of light feels the most abrasive in a dark room. Death Stranding to me is another game where the time spent with Sam travelling through the world means something. You and Sam are alone for lengthy periods of time, and the whole strange apocalyptic world is brought together by that fact. Every other feature or attempt at building an atmosphere that makes you feel lonely and introspective is sealed by the long stretches you walk alone. And this idea and feeling of loneliness and independence is woven through some game stories as well. Arthur Morgan is the workhorse of the gang, forgotten, and by the end completely separated and abandoned by most of the people he trusted and cared for. Yet he independently was the strongest link, and I think people latch onto characters like this. Throughout games and film, characters that act alone in either ideology, actions, or authority. Someone who can independently struggle yet win a battle of control. I think we almost envy that. the strength to take control of the most dire situations completely alone. Characters that most of the time have complex internal moral conflicts in which they have to contend with and overcome. The gang itself is even on the edge of a new age. As the new rules try to flush them out, they are forced to go into hiding and be isolated, sort of outcasts in their own world. When Red Dead came out and people finished it, I saw videos of people crying at the end of the story. And the writing is really good, but I think the tens of hours you spend with Arthur out in the world is equally as important. The game's runtime can be, if you stick to the story, 60 hours and up. You really do become invested in his actions. I have finished the game 3 times and have never brought myself to get the bad ending. This is also why I think the game works uniquely only as a game, and wouldn't fit as a TV show or film. The longer runtime is needed. Most of the sympathy and connection you feel with Arthur is through the time spent in-game, isolated away from the gang, cooking, hunting, and just living, leading to the last mission in the game where you simply ride through a forest on your horse with music in the background. It's one of the most powerful parts of the story, and yet one of the most simple parts too. They understand the power of reflection and give you 5 minutes to quietly sit in it. And it's not just Red Dead that has moments like these. Death Stranding has highlighted points throughout the game when you enter a new area, where the camera pans away and you are left with nothing but music and the view. You are even welcomed by one of these within the first section of the game, letting you reflect on what just happened in the cutscene before. Games, like a song or film, need time to let you indulge in what you're seeing and the story you are playing through. I think, and hopefully I'm right, people want this more from games, deeper meanings, reflections, and emotions. Reused ideas year on year as old IPs get forcefully dragged through time, with all the bruises still showing, feel to me like they're at least not spoke about as much. I see praise going to games that have no ideas and huge amounts of creativity behind them, and I couldn't be any happier about it.